Welcome, friends. Are you sitting comfortably? Good. Let me take you to the Scottish Highlands, a place of breathtaking beauty and ancient mystery. The Highlands are a land of rolling, mist-shrouded mountains, deep glens and lochs that seem to stretch into eternity. But beneath the surface of this rugged, untamed wilderness lies a darker side, a place where the veil between the living and the dead feels thin, where the wind carries whispers, and where the land itself seems to hold secrets it would rather not share. This story takes place in the spring of 2023, a time when the Highlands are still waking from their long winter slumber. The snow has mostly melted, but the air remains sharp, and storms can roll in without warning. It's a place where isolation is not just a feeling, but a reality. Mobile signals are scarce, and the nearest help can be hours away. It's the kind of place where you're forced to confront your own insignificance, where the mountains seem to watch you, indifferent to your presence. Our story begins with a group of hikers, friends, acquaintances, maybe even strangers brought together by a shared love of adventure. They had planned this trip for months, eager to escape the noise of the modern world and immerse themselves in the raw beauty of the Highlands. They were experienced enough to know the risks, the unpredictable weather, the treacherous terrain, the sheer remoteness of it all. But they were confident, prepared, or so they thought. The hike had been uneventful at first. The group moved steadily along the narrow mountain paths, their boots crunching against the gravel, their breath visible in the cold air. The landscape was stunning, almost otherworldly, with jagged peaks rising like sentinels against the gray sky. But as the day wore on, the weather began to change. The wind picked up, howling through the valleys like a living thing, and dark clouds gathered overhead. By late afternoon, the first drops of rain began to fall, quickly escalating into a torrential downpour. The hikers knew they needed to find shelter, and fast. That's when they remembered the Bothy. Bothies are a unique feature of the Scottish Highlands, small, abandoned stone huts scattered across the landscape, originally built for shepherds and travelers. They're free to use, offering a basic refuge from the elements. The group had passed one earlier in the day, a squat, weathered structure nestled at the base of a hill. It wasn't ideal, but it was their best option. They turned back, the rain lashing against their faces, the wind threatening to knock them off their feet. By the time they reached the Bothy, they were soaked to the bone and shivering. The hut was as uninviting as they remembered, a single room with a dirt floor, a crumbling fireplace, and walls blackened by decades of soot. The air inside was damp and cold, carrying the faint, musty smell of decay. But it was dry, and that was all that mattered. They set about making themselves as comfortable as possible, unpacking their gear and lighting a small fire in the hearth. The flickering flames cast long, dancing shadows on the walls, giving the room an eerie, almost alive quality. They talked and laughed, trying to shake off the unease that seemed to cling to the place. But as the night wore on, the atmosphere grew heavier, the silence between their conversations stretching longer. It was during one of these silences that someone suggested a head count. It was a practical idea. After all, they needed to make sure everyone was accounted for. They counted once, then again, and then a third time, just to be sure. The result was always the same. There was one more person in the room than there should have been. At first, they laughed it off, blaming the miscount on exhaustion or the flickering firelight playing tricks on their eyes. But the unease was palpable now, a cold knot in the pit of their stomachs. They counted again, this time more carefully, each person calling out their name as they were counted. And again, the numbers didn't add up. The group began to argue, their voices rising in panic. Who was the extra person? Was it a mistake? A prank? But no one admitted to anything, and the tension in the room became unbearable. The fire burned low, casting the room into deeper shadows, and the wind outside howled like a wounded animal. Then, someone noticed something strange. One of the hikers, a quiet, unassuming figure who had kept to themselves for most of the trip, was sitting apart from the group, their face obscured by the shadows. When asked who they were, they didn't respond. They just sat there, motionless, their head tilted slightly as if listening to something only they could hear. The group decided to confront them, but as they approached, the figure stood and moved to the far corner of the room, their movements unnaturally smooth, almost gliding. The firelight caught their face for the first time, and what they saw made their blood run cold. The figure's features were wrong, blurred, shifting, as if they couldn't quite hold their shape. Their eyes were black pits, empty and endless. The hikers froze, paralyzed by fear, as the figure began to speak. Its voice was a low, guttural whisper, like the wind through the cracks in the walls. It spoke of the land, of the mountains and the glens, of the countless souls who had been lost to the wilderness over the centuries. It spoke of hunger, of loneliness, of a need to be remembered, and then it said something that chilled them to their core. "You invited me in." The fire sputtered and died, plunging the room into darkness. In the chaos that followed, the hikers scrambled to escape, their screams swallowed by the storm outside. When the sun rose the next morning, the Bothy was empty. Their gear was still there, scattered across the floor, but there was no sign of the hikers. No footprints leading away from the hut. Nothing. To this day, the Bothy remains abandoned, a place avoided by locals and hikers alike. They say that on stormy nights, if you listen closely, you can hear voices coming from inside, whispers carried on the wind calling out for help, but no one dares to answer.
Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more.